You're listening to Unhooked. On today's episode, a fundamental principle in recovery that you have to understand if you want true freedom. And this is the understanding that addiction is not your problem. So, stay tuned.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Lipkowitz, and with over 12 years of meditation experience as a mindfulness trainer and coach for high performers, I've become obsessed with helping people break free from compulsive, unhealthy behaviors and addictions and step into a life of true freedom so that they can finally become their best selves and cultivate deeper and lasting fulfillment. I've created Unhooked, the Breaking Porn Addiction podcast, to give you simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies to master your mind and optimize your life. This is Unhooked. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Unhooked. I'm your host, Jeremy Lipkowitz, and we are here in Montenegro this week. I am here to celebrate the birthday of a friend, a dear friend of mine. And it's been a moment or a few days of a lot of reflection, just reflecting on my life in this recovery journey, my life in the coaching, and how far I've come, thinking about when I started my recovery journey around 13 years ago. And I know so deeply that all of the success and prosperity and the happiness that I have in my life right now is because of me starting down this path of recovery, learning how to go to the dark shadows of my soul and look at what's uncomfortable, to be honest with myself about what I need to change, has allowed me to create a more fulfilling life, has allowed me to live a life of deeper fulfillment, to build deep and meaningful relationships, and to live with a sense of integrity. This is one of the things that's so important. It crops up so much with porn addiction and sex addiction and any kind of addiction, is when you are acting out in the addiction, it's very hard to live a life of integrity, to live with that sense of inner peace, because there's that shame, there's that self-judgment. There is so much, energy and self-confidence and so much that addiction will take away from your life, whether it's addiction to porn or addiction to work, addiction to alcohol or gambling. All of the subtle ways that addiction can just steal energy from your life and hold you back from creating that 10 out of 10 fulfilling life that all of us want. And so for me, being here, celebrating my friend's birthday and just looking back on my life, I really do have a lot of gratitude for, my addiction and the discoveries that has given me. And I want to talk about something today which is so fundamental for recovery. This is an understanding that if you don't get this right, if you miss this concept, or if you don't fully grok this, then your recovery will never really take root. It will never get firmly established because you'll be working on the wrong things. And this is about the topic of addiction and how addiction is actually not your problem. And going into this concept, I'm going to be drawing on a lot of the work from Dr. Gabor Maté. He's a Canadian physician and a specialist in terminal illnesses, in chemical dependence, HIV positive patients. And he's also a world-renowned author of different books. He's a columnist, and he's known particularly for his knowledge about things like ADD, stress, chronic illness, trauma, and importantly on addiction. And I want to talk about this topic today, something that Dr. Gabor Maté covers often. But, this is something that there's so much stigma around the word addiction or the topic of addiction or being an addict in some way. When most people hear the word addict, they think of some, irresponsible, vile person sitting in a dark alley shooting up drugs and committing crime. There's just so much stigma, so many connotations associated with addiction and addicts. And in a world that has so much stigma around the concept of addiction, Dr. Gabor Maté has a fresh and a very compassionate perspective on addiction. So first, how does Dr. Gabor Maté define addiction? So he defines it this way. He says, my definition of addiction is any behavior that gives you temporary relief, temporary pleasure, but in the long term causes harm, has some negative consequences, and you can't give it up despite those negative consequences. Later on he says, addiction is not a choice that anybody makes. It is not a moral failure. It is not an ethical lapse. It is not a weakness of character. It is not a failure of will, which is how society depicts addiction. Nor is it an inherited brain disease, which is how the medical tendency is to see it. But what it actually is it's a response to human suffering. Addiction is an attempt to escape suffering temporarily. Now, I love this perspective on addiction. Addiction is the human response to pain and suffering. It's not a moral failure. It's not an ethical lapse. It doesn't show a weakness of character. What it is, it's a response to pain and suffering. And Gabor Maté, he goes on to say this. He says, the addiction wasn't your problem. Your problem was that you had a lot of emotional pain that you didn't know what to do with. The addiction was the attempt to solve the problem. So the addiction was the attempt to solve the problem of emotional pain that you didn't know what to deal with. All addictions, no matter what they are, stem from some response to pain. It might be the pain of some childhood trauma. It might be the pain of loneliness, the pain of disappointment. It could simply be the pain of boredom, not knowing what to do with yourself. And as he says, it's emotional pain that you didn't know what to do with. So many of us don't know how to deal with emotional pain except to run away from it, push it away, or medicate over it with some pleasure or distraction. So Dr. Maté says this. He says, addiction is a response to suffering. And what people need in response to addiction is not judgment and not simply symptom control. They need to be helped to heal from their trauma. So a better question, instead of can we cure people with addiction, is this. Can people heal from trauma sufficiently so they don't have to keep escaping into addiction to lessen the suffering of their trauma? Now this really hits the nail on the head. First of all, Maté's framing gets rid of the stigma of addicts being these vile creatures with morality issues or low self-control. And instead of focusing on curing the symptoms of addiction, it says, can we focus on going to the root cause of addictive behaviors? What pain caused this person to want to escape reality? And can we address that pain sufficiently and give people the tools of working with pain so that these people don't need to escape? And this is so well supported by science. Particularly one of the experiments I'd love to talk about is what's known as the rat park experiment. So the rat park experiment, it comes from many decades ago when they were studying the effects of drugs and addiction, and they were looking at morphine. And what they did is they gave rats water laced with morphine and got them addicted, and showed that the rats would sit there and drink the morphine water and become so addicted they would just sit there and drink the water until they almost died. They collapsed from exhaustion. They weren't getting food or exercising or anything. And so that first experiment showed just how addictive substances and drugs could be. But what was interesting is then a researcher had this very interesting question. He said, well, these rats are living in cages. They're living in these miserable conditions. What would happen if we gave them a more supportive environment, a happier, more fulfilling life, something that was closer to how they might actually live in nature? And so they gave them what they called the rat park. It had exercise wheels. It had other rats to play with. They could sleep around and have sex with other rats. There was food. And it was this exciting, fulfilling environment that they lived in. And then what they did is they let them live in this rat park, and then they got them addicted to the morphine water. So they force-fed them the morphine water, and then put them back in the rat park. And even after being forced into the addiction, once they were in the rat park, they no longer, just wanted to sit by the morphine water. They weren't addicted because they had a fulfilling life. They, drink a little bit of the water, but then most of the time they would go out and play, sleep around, exercise, all these other things. And what this shows us is that it is never about the substance. Instead, recovery is about making sure you have a life that is healthy and fulfilling and supported. So it doesn't matter whether we're talking about morphine or cocaine or alcohol or porn, whatever it is, it's not about the substance. It's about the response to pain, the response to a life that is filled with suffering, and whether or not we have the resources to deal with that pain and suffering. Now, this is why doing inner work and having tools for emotion management are essential in recovery. This is stuff that I offer in my online course. It is something I talk about in all of my client interactions, and in the podcast I talk about all the time. You have to do the inner work. If you only focus on changing your behavior, recovery will fail. It's like putting a bandage over a cancerous growth. You can cover up the outside, the appearance, but you're not going to the root source of the problem. So what are some of the best inner work tools to learn for your journey of recovery? Well, one of the most important for me, and it is foundational in so many ways, is meditation. Cultivating a strong and healthy mind, cultivating awareness, cultivating equanimity, cultivating compassion, inner peace, tranquility. These are all mental qualities that you cultivate through meditation. So meditation is a key thing you can do to focus on that inner work. Another tool that you can do for this inner work, for healing and giving you emotion management tools, is something like talk therapy, whether it's with a therapist, a psychologist, a coach, a mentor, but actually being vulnerable and learning how to express your emotions and be vulnerable with another human being. This is a huge part of recovery, is learning how to be vulnerable, learning how to get support from other people. This is such a difficult journey to go on your own, and it is so much easier if you know how to get support, how to ask for help. The last tool that I'll offer here for today is just doing things like journaling, doing practices to give you more self-awareness and understanding what's important to you. So journaling about what you need, journaling about where you want to go, what are some of your motivations, your goals. Again, these are things I cover in the online course, but it's easy to find some journaling prompts online. You can just go online and search journaling prompts for self-awareness, for motivation, for clarity. But doing some self-awareness work to know what is it you want in life? Where do you want to go? What's important to you? What values do you want to live by? These are important tools for your recovery. Now, going back to Gabor Maté and his perspective on addiction, he goes on to ask this interesting question. He says, the real question in addiction is not why the addiction, but why the pain. If you want to understand addiction, you can't look at what's wrong with the addiction. You have to look at what's right about it. In other words, what is the person getting from the addiction that otherwise they don't have? What addicts get is relief from pain. What they get is a sense of peace, a sense of control, a sense of calmness, very, very temporarily. And the question is, why are these qualities missing from their lives? So ultimately here, you have to find ways to make your life more fulfilling, just like the rats in the rat park. Understanding that as humans, we're social creatures. We need fun. We need relationships. We need exercise. We need sunshine. We need food. And so if you are struggling with any kind of addictive behavior, the next time you notice one of these compulsive behaviors cropping up, instead of asking yourself, why the addiction? Pause and ask yourself, where is the pain that I'm running from? Where is the suffering in my life? Where do I have unmet needs? And what is it that I need in this moment? This is a much healthier perspective to have on your addiction. So again, instead of beating yourself up, chastising yourself, criticizing yourself, or asking why the addiction, ask yourself, where is the pain? Where is my suffering? What unmet needs are here in this moment? So I hope that that is helpful for you today. Again, this framing, addiction isn't the problem. The addiction is the attempt to solve the problem. Understanding the source of the addiction comes from pain that you didn't know how to deal with, or that maybe you still don't know how to deal with. Boredom, loneliness, disappointment, whatever it is, learning how to deal with pain is so critical. And then on top of that, building a more fulfilling life is stuff that we need to do in our recovery. So again, I hope that's been helpful for you. If you want to support the podcast, again, please just go leave a review. That is the best way to support it for now. Again, it just gets it out in front of more people, helps spread the word. So signing off from Montenegro, and I'll see you on the next episode.